Deep in the heart of Africa, beneath the golden savannas and dense rainforests, lies a secret lost to time, an intricate web of trade routes that once connected kingdoms, cultures, and continents. Picture caravans laden with gleaming gold, rare ivory, and exotic spices moving silently across the landscape, their journeys guarded by whispers and shadows. These were the forbidden trade networks of ancient Africa, thriving for centuries before vanishing into the annals of history, leaving behind only fragments of their existence. What happened to these routes? Who held the power to control such vast wealth and knowledge? And why did they disappear so completely? The answers lie buried in the sands of time, waiting to be uncovered. This isn't just a story of commerce, it's a tale of ambition, intrigue, and the unbreakable bonds that tied distant civilizations together. Think of the Sahara not as a barren desert, but as a bustling highway, where traders from Timbuktu to Cairo exchanged goods and ideas, shaping the course of history. Imagine the great kingdoms of Mali and Ghana, their wealth so legendary it sparked myths across the world. Yet, despite their grandeur, these networks faded, their secrets slipping through the fingers of modern historians. Was it climate change, political upheaval, or something far more mysterious? The clues are scattered like puzzle pieces, hidden in ancient texts, oral traditions, and the silent ruins of forgotten cities. Today, we're embarking on a journey to piece together this lost chapter of human history. We'll dive into the latest archaeological discoveries, decode the stories passed down through generations, and explore how cutting-edge technology is helping us see these vanished networks in a whole new light. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand why these trade routes were more than just economic lifelines. They were the heartbeat of Africa's golden age, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of its people. So come with us as we step into the shadows of the past, unraveling the enigma of the forbidden trade networks that once shaped the world and then vanished without a trace. Long before the first European ships appeared on Africa's coasts, the continent's interior was already a hive of economic and cultural activity, buzzing with trade routes that spanned thousands of miles. Imagine the Kingdom of Ghana flourishing between the 6th and 13th centuries, its rulers draped in gold so abundant that Arab merchants wrote of dogs wearing golden collars. This wealth didn't come from conquest, it came from trade, a carefully orchestrated exchange where salt from the Sahara's mines traveled south, while gold from the forests of West Africa moved north. Each caravan that crossed the desert was a lifeline, connecting empires and reshaping the balance of power, but not all trade was conducted in the open. Some routes were shrouded in secrecy, known only to a select few. These were the forbidden networks' pathways guarded by local rulers, hidden from outsiders to protect their monopoly on precious goods. Take the legendary gold fields of Wangara, a region so jealously concealed that traders would blindfold foreign merchants before leading them to the mines. Others, like the Ivory route snaking through Central Africa, were deliberately kept off maps to avoid attracting raiders or rival kingdoms. These weren't just economic decisions, they were acts of survival, ensuring that wealth and knowledge stayed in the hands of those who controlled it. The true genius of these networks lay in their adaptability. When the Sahara grew too harsh, traders shifted routes to follow rivers and oases. When political turmoil disrupted one kingdom, merchants simply rerouted through another. The great Zimbabwe civilization, for example, thrived by controlling the flow of gold and copper between the interior and the Swahili coast, its towering stone walls standing as a silent testament to its economic might. Yet, despite their sophistication, these systems left few written records. Instead, they relied on oral traditions, passed down through generations of griots and traders, their secrets whispered like the wind over the dunes. What made these networks vanish? Climate shifts may have dried up vital water sources, while the arrival of European colonizers disrupted centuries-old systems, redirecting Africa's wealth outward. But perhaps the greatest mystery isn't why they faded, it's how they flourished for so long, binding together a continent of staggering diversity through trust, innovation, and an unspoken code of exchange. These weren't just routes for moving goods, they were the veins of empires, pulsing with the lifeblood of diplomacy, art, and shared knowledge. And though they're now buried under the sands of time, their legacy lingers in the cultures they connected and the stories they left behind. The Sahara wasn't just a desert, it was a golden highway where fortunes were made and lost beneath the scorching sun. Picture this: endless lines of camels, each laden with leather pouches heavy with gold dust, snaking their way across dunes taller than castles. These were the legendary gold routes, connecting the mines of West Africa to markets as far away as Rome and Baghdad. But what's truly astonishing isn't just the scale of this trade, it's how deliberately its secrets were guarded. Traders from the medieval kingdom of Ghana would reportedly meet foreign merchants in silent, moonlit exchanges, pouring gold onto scales without speaking a word, then vanishing back into the night. Recent discoveries have begun pulling back the curtain on these shadowy networks. In Mauritania's Drought region, archaeologists unearthed the ruins of Aouda Coast, a once thriving trading post where Berber merchants brokered deals under the watchful eyes of local rulers. The walls of nearby caves tell their own story, etched with symbols of camels and palm trees alongside strange, zigzagging lines that some believe were coded maps to distant goldfields. Then there's the mystery of the silent trade described by medieval Arab geographers, where goods were left unattended for days and gold appeared as if by magic. Was this elaborate theater to protect the source of wealth, or proof of an unspoken honor system spanning cultures? The real power players behind this trade remain hotly debated. While Berber middlemen like the Sanhaja tribe were essential, controlling key oases and salt mines, some scholars argue they were merely puppets to a greater force, perhaps the enigmatic Takra kingdom or the rising empire of Mali. One tantalizing clue comes from a 12th century account by geographer Al-Idrisi, who wrote of a city of gold, so well hidden that even seasoned guides could only find it by following specific stars. To this day, no one knows if he meant Timbuktu, Koum by sail, or somewhere entirely lost. What sealed the fate of these routes? Climate change certainly played a role. Shifting sand dunes swallowed wells, while dwindling rainfall made crossings lethal. But the final blow likely came from Europe's growing obsession with African gold. By the 15th century, Portuguese ships began bypassing Saharan middlemen, offering firearms in exchange for direct access to coastal mines. The old ways couldn't compete, yet in remote corners of the desert, fragments endure. Tuareg caravans still navigate by ancestral stars, and in Mali's Dogon country, elders speak of gold that walks, a poetic nod to the camels that once carried empires on their backs. These whispers remind us that some secrets aren't truly lost, just waiting for the right listener. Deep in the emerald heart of the Congo basin, where vines twist around crumbling stone walls, lie the remnants of settlements that once pulsed with life. These silent cities tell a story of wealth carved from ivory tusks so prized they fueled kingdoms and drew traders from as far as China and the Middle East. Unlike the gold routes of the Sahara, these networks operated in near total secrecy, shielded by dense rainforests and protected by local rulers who understood the value of discretion. Archaeologists have uncovered astonishing evidence. Ivory workshops with half-carved figurines abandoned mid-stroke, trade weights shaped like forest animals, and copper ingots stamped with symbols no modern scholar can fully decipher. The scale of this trade was staggering. 10th century Persian geographer Al-Masudi wrote of Congo ivory reaching Zanzibar, where merchants marveled at its quality, softer and easier to carve than Asian varieties, yet strong enough to craft everything from royal thrones to sacred amulets. But the real mystery isn't how these goods traveled across continents, it's why the cities that controlled this lucrative trade suddenly emptied. In the ruins of Ngongo Mbata, researchers found cooking pots still perched on hearths, as if families walked away mid-meal. At Kindoki, a ceremonial site yielded ivory tusks deliberately buried beneath altars, their tips painted with ochre, a ritual act that suggests not panic but purposeful departure. What caused the collapse? One compelling theory points to ecological disaster. Pollen samples from lake beds reveal a dramatic shift around the 14th century, less rainforest tree pollen, more grasses and ferns. This suggests deforestation on a massive scale, possibly from overharvesting ebony and mahogany needed to build trading vessels. Without trees to anchor the soil, rivers may have silted up, disrupting transport routes. But oral traditions offer a darker explanation. Local Bakongo elders speak of the Great Forgetting, a time when knowledge of ivory routes became taboo after foreign traders began kidnapping craftsmen for their skills. Some legends even describe cursed ivory tusks that brought sickness to entire villages unless returned to the forest. The most haunting possibility: these cities weren't abandoned, they were erased. In the 17th century, Portuguese documents mention Congo nobles burning settlements to prevent Europeans from learning ivory sources. Similar stories echo across the region, from the Luba peoples, hidden maps drawn on bark cloth, to the Yoka warriors who allegedly poisoned waterholes along trade paths. Whether through ecological recklessness, self-protection, or supernatural belief, one thing is clear: the Congo's ivory networks didn't just fade, they were systematically dismantled, their secrets buried under centuries of growth. Today, as satellite imaging reveals lost settlements beneath the canopy, we're left to wonder, were these acts of preservation or warnings etched into the land itself? In the scorching expanse of the Sahel, where the sun turns the earth to dust, caravans once moved like rivers of white gold salt, the lifeblood of empires. While gold glittered in royal treasuries, salt sustained civilizations, preserving food, seasoning meals, and even serving as currency in markets from Timbuktu to Tripoli. The mines of Taghaza became legendary, their walls literally carved from salt blocks, where enslaved laborers toiled under the blistering sun, extracting slabs so pure they were traded pound for pound with gold in the kingdoms of the south. But by the 16th century, entire routes had gone silent, their trails swallowed by the dunes. What could have dismantled such a vital network? Medieval Arab chroniclers left cryptic clues. 14th century traveler Ibn Battuta described Taghaza as the most miserable of places, where traders covered their faces against salt-laden winds, yet he marveled at the endless caravans departing for Mali. Decades later, Leo Africanus wrote of abandoned wells along the Thames-roofed route, their stones blackened by fire. Were these signs of conflict? Recent excavations near Taoudeni revealed something startling: not just broken pottery or lost coins, but entire caravanserai walls pockmarked by what appear to be arrow strikes. Even stranger, some sites show evidence of deliberate sabotage: camel bones piled near collapsed wells, salt blocks strategically placed to block narrow passes. Theories abound. Some scholars point to the collapse of the Mali Empire, whose emperors had tightly controlled salt taxes. others cite the rise of the Songhai, who may have rerouted trade to avoid rivals. But the most haunting possibility comes from oral histories of the Amerindian people, who speak of a great thirst war, a conflict so brutal that rival factions poisoned oases rather than let enemies drink. Salt, once a symbol of life, became a weapon. By the time Moroccan invaders seized Timbuktu in 1591, the old routes were already ghosts, their knowledge preserved only in songs sung by Tuareg guides to navigate the voids between stars. Yet fragments endure. In Mauritania's Wallata, a medieval accounting ledger lists salt deliveries that abruptly stop mid-page. Near Arayuain, a single salt slab sits atop a dune, etched with a Saharan cross, perhaps a trader's final marker. These silent witnesses hint at a truth more complex than mere economic shift, that the disappearance of the salt caravans wasn't an ending, but a transformation. As ocean salt from European ships flooded markets, the Sahara's white gold lost its monopoly, and with it, the empires built on its back crumbled into legend. But if you listen closely on still nights in the desert, the wind still carries echoes of camel bells, a whisper of the routes that once tied a continent together. While gold and salt dominated the great Saharan trade routes, another metal pulsed through Africa's economic veins: copper, the red gold of antiquity. Unlike its flashier counterparts, copper was the workhorse of empires, hammered into tools that built cities, cast into coins that fueled markets, and shaped into ornaments that declared status from the Niger Delta to the Zambezi. But what makes this trade truly fascinating isn't just its ubiquity. It's the deliberate obscurity surrounding its sources. Some mines were so fiercely guarded that their locations became state secrets, lost even to the descendants of those who worked them. Take the legendary mines of Kansanshi in modern-day Zambia. Arab traders of the 12th century wrote of copper so pure it could be bent by hand, yet no outsider could pinpoint the exact location. Local Bemba traditions speak of singing mines, where workers chanted encoded rhythms to disorient potential spies. Even more mysterious are the copper pits of the Limpopo Valley, where Shona smiths allegedly melted ore using furnace designs so advanced that colonial-era archaeologists initially mistook them for European imports. The sheer sophistication of these operations hints at something extraordinary. These weren't just quarries, but industrial hubs protected by layers of ritual and secrecy. Why such extreme measures? Copper was more than a commodity, it was power. In the Kingdom of Congo, rulers maintained a monopoly by restricting mining to sacred sites, where extraction required royal permission and priestly blessings. A single 17th century Portuguese ledger from Mbanza, Congo, lists over 4,000 copper crosses used as currency, each stamped with the Mani Congo's seal. Lose control of the mines and you risked economic collapse. This explains the gruesome discoveries at Zimbabwe's Thulimla site, where archaeologists found skeletons with crushed hands, possibly punishment for smuggling raw copper. Modern science is finally piercing these ancient veils of secrecy. Geochemical fingerprinting has traced copper artifacts from West African markets back to specific deposits in Mauritania's Acjaujt region, proving trade links once dismissed as myth. In the DR Congo, satellite imagery has revealed vast, overgrown mining trenches near Kapushi, matching medieval descriptions of rivers of green stone. Yet many riddles remain. Who were the master metallurgists of the Nok culture, whose intricate copper figurines predate known smelting technology in the region? And what happened to the fabled Great Copper Mountain described in Swahili chronicles, said to glow red at dusk? The answers may lie in Africa's living traditions. In Burkina Faso, Dogon blacksmiths still perform ceremonies honoring ancestral mine spirits, while in Namibia, Himba elders recount stories of metal that grows, suggesting some deposits were deliberately replanted to ensure future supply. These fragments of knowledge passed down through generations remind us that the copper trade wasn't just about wealth, it was a sacred covenant between earth and empire. As researchers decode these clues, one truth emerges: Africa's hidden copper networks didn't vanish. They simply retreated into the landscape, waiting for the day their secrets would be valued not for the metal they held, but for the stories they guard. While the Sahara's golden caravans and Congo's ivory trails captured imaginations, the Swahili coast harbored its own treasures, spices that flavored empires. Picture the ports of Kilwa and Mombasa in their heyday, where the air hung thick with the scent of cinnamon and cloves, and ships from as far as India and China jostled for space in bustling harbors. This wasn't just trade, it was alchemy. A single sack of Malabar pepper could buy a house in Zanzibar, while cardamom from the Ethiopian highlands was worth its weight in silver. But beneath this vibrant commerce lay a shadow network of routes so closely guarded that even seasoned traders spoke of them in code. The genius of the Swahili merchants wasn't just in what they sold, it was in what they concealed. Take the case of the lost cinnamon groves of southern Somalia. 10th century Persian geographer Ibn Khordadbeh wrote of forests where cinnamon trees grew so thick that a man could walk for days beneath their shade. Yet by the time Portuguese explorers arrived in the 16th century, the locations had vanished from maps. Recent archaeology offers a clue. In the ruins of Shanga, a Swahili settlement on Pate Island, researchers found clay jars lined with cinnamon residue, but no evidence of local cultivation. This suggests a deliberate strategy, importing spices through hidden channels, then erasing their origins to maintain monopoly. Shipwrecks tell an even more intriguing story. The 2001 discovery of the Black Asaka wreck off Eritrea yielded a trove of 9th century spices packed in hollowed-out logs sealed with beeswax, a method unmatched in any known trade records. Even more puzzling are the Kilwa Chronicles, a set of Swahili manuscripts describing phantom fleets that sailed without logs or manifests. Were these smuggling operations or part of a larger system of trade protection? Some scholars point to the Shirazi elite, a merchant class rumored to use lunar navigation and tide charts unknown to outsiders, ensuring their routes remained uncharted. Why did these networks disappear? The usual suspects: colonial disruption, shifting markets play a role, but the truth may be more profound. In Lamu's backstreets, elders still sing the Song of the Spice Keepers, a haunting melody about merchants who buried their ledgers in the sea rather than reveal sources. Meanwhile, Zanzibar's archives contain 18th century Amani decrees ordering the destruction of clove trees to break local control. Whether through defiance or adaptation, the Spice Guardians didn't just fade, they chose invisibility over exploitation. Today, as divers uncover amphorae of preserved ginger in the Mozambique Channel, we're left to wonder, were these routes truly lost or simply waiting for a time when their secrets could be valued again? Secrecy wasn't just a precaution in ancient African trade, it was a strategic masterpiece. Imagine a world where knowledge of a single route could make or break an empire, where the difference between wealth and ruin lay in who controlled the information. Take the legendary goldfields of Bambuk, nestled between the Senegal and Falim rivers. Arab chroniclers like al-Bakri wrote of a kingdom so protective of its gold sources that foreign traders were led to riverbanks blindfolded, where they'd leave their goods and retreat. Only then would locals emerge to place gold beside the merchandise, never meeting face to face. This wasn't mere paranoia. It was a calculated system to prevent outsiders from tracing the gold back to its origin. But secrecy took even darker turns in the salt trade. Tuareg caravans crossing the Tenere Desert used a complex system of cairn-stacked stones visible only to initiates to mark hidden water sources. Get the sequence wrong and you'd perish in the wastes. Recent excavations near Bilma uncovered a grim twist. Some cairns were decoys leading rival traders into dead-end canyons. Was this ruthless competition or survival in a landscape where one extra mouth at a well could doom an entire caravan? The answer may lie in a 14th century manuscript from Timbuktu's Sankore University, which describes a war of thirst between Berber and Sonic traders, complete with coded maps etched onto camel bones. The Congo's ivory networks elevated secrecy to an art form. Luba craftsmen in present-day DR Congo reportedly split tusks into sections, distributing them among different traders to ensure no single individual knew the full route to coastal markets. Portuguese explorer Duarte Pacheco Pereira wrote in frustration of middlemen who'd speak in river sounds rather than reveal supply chains. Even more ingenious were the false origin tactics. Swahili merchants in Zanzibar stamped ivory with fake markings from India to mislead European buyers about its true source. Why such elaborate deception? Some scholars point to the collapse of the Mali Empire as a cautionary tale. After Mansa Musa's infamous gold-laden pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, the empire became a target for invaders hungry for its wealth. Within decades, once bustling trade cities like Niani lay in ruins. Later kingdoms learned the hard way. Visibility invited vulnerability, yet secrecy had its costs. When the Portuguese arrived with ships that bypassed Saharan middlemen, many hidden networks unraveled overnight. The greatest irony, those who guarded their knowledge too well left no heirs to their legacy. Today, archaeologists sifting through the sands of Orlil or the forests of Mayum aren't just uncovering trade goods, they're piecing together a lost language of power, written not in words but in silences. For centuries, the history of Africa's vanished trade networks lived not in parchment or stone, but in the memories of griots, the revered storytellers who carried generations of knowledge in their songs. Picture an elder under the baobab tree, his voice rising and falling as he recounts the journey of a 12th century gold caravan, describing the weight of the dust in each leather pouch, the exact bend in the river where traders rested. These oral archives are meticulous, often passing down details like tax rates and market prices with startling accuracy. Yet when European explorers arrived with pens and parchment, their records told wildly different stories of chaotic markets and untamed wilderness, where African merchants were mere middlemen in their own empires. How do we reconcile these conflicting versions of history? The answer lies in a revolutionary blend of science and tradition. Take the case of the Ghana Empire's gold trade. Arab chroniclers like al-Bakri wrote of a king who held court atop a golden throne, while Portuguese accounts centuries later dismissed the region as barren of civilization. But when archaeologists excavated Koum, by sail the empire's legendary capital, they found something extraordinary. A grid of stone foundations matching the griots' descriptions of the royal quarter, complete with fragments of gold leaf clinging to buried pillars. Even more telling were the microscopic pollen grains preserved in ancient trash pits, revealing traces of crops like sorghum and cotton, a proof of the sophisticated agriculture European writers had claimed didn't exist. Oral traditions also preserve what written records deliberately omit. In Mali, griots still sing of the silent revolt among salt miners at Tagheza, a story absent from Arab trade logs. For years, scholars dismissed this as folklore until excavations uncovered shackles with unique sonic designs, suggesting enslaved laborers indeed controlled parts of the mines. Similarly, Swahili fishermen along the coast recite poems about ships that came without sails, their descriptions eerily matching Chinese porcelain fragments found in Great Zimbabwe's ruins. These aren't just stories, they're counter-narratives, challenging the colonial myth that Africa's trade networks depended on foreign direction. The real breakthrough came when researchers began applying linguistic analysis to oral histories. By comparing the syntax of trade-related terms across hundreds of griot performances, anthropologists detected consistent memory anchors, repeated phrases encoding precise data. For example, a Mandinka epic about Mansa Musa's pilgrimage includes the line, "The camels bent like crescent moons," which scholars now believe refers to the specific load capacity of Saharan caravans. Meanwhile, in Benin, bronze plaques depicting Portuguese traders were long assumed to be accurate portraits until oral historians pointed out the postures and tools matched local spiritual iconography, suggesting the artworks were sly commentaries on European arrogance rather than documentary records. This fusion of disciplines is rewriting history's map. Satellite imagery has confirmed trade routes described in Dogon creation myths, while isotope analysis of medieval glass beads in Timbuktu traces them to workshops in Ife, Nigeria, exactly as Yoruba oral histories claim. Even disputes hold value. When Griots from Mauritania describe the Almoravid dynasty as trade protectors, but Berber texts call them bandits, archaeologists look for evidence of fortified way stations along disputed routes. The truth, it seems, lies in the gaps between narratives where material evidence and memory intersect. What emerges is a history far richer than any single account could convey, one where African merchants weren't passive participants, but architects of a globalized world. The next time you hear a griot song or read a colonial ledger, listen for the spaces between the words. There, in the silence, the forbidden trade networks whisper their true stories. The relentless sun that once baked the Saharan salt caravans may hold clues to one of history's greatest vanishing acts. Deep in the dunes of Mauritania, scientists examining ancient tree stumps long buried under shifting sands discovered something startling. The rings told a story of abrupt change, centuries of steady growth suddenly interrupted by narrow, desperate bands, evidence of prolonged droughts that would have turned vital oases to dust. This wasn't just bad weather. It was a death sentence for trade routes that depended on precise ecological balance. Imagine camel trains stranded without water, their precious cargo abandoned as traders searched in vain for wells that had sustained generations. But drought wasn't the only threat. Sediment cores extracted from Lake Bosumtwi in Ghana reveal an opposite disaster: torrential rains that reshaped entire landscapes. Layers of coarse gravel in the mud tell of flash floods so violent they scoured away the very paths caravans had followed for centuries. The irony is cruel. The same rains that filled the Niger Bend to overflowing also washed away the riverbank markets where gold and salt once changed hands. Even more telling are pollen samples from the Congo basin, showing a dramatic decline in raffia palms, the very trees whose fibers bound trade bales and repaired fishing nets. Without them, entire supply chains unraveled. The most haunting evidence comes from the ruins of Tadmeka, a medieval trading hub in Mali. Archaeologists found hundreds of camel bones clustered near collapsed cisterns, their teeth worn down from gnawing at rocks in a futile search for moisture. Nearby, a merchant's ledger etched onto a clay shard lists debts suddenly left unpaid, frozen in time like the climate shifts that silenced the city. Similar stories echo across the continent. In Great Zimbabwe, soil analysis shows that the elite's cattle herds switched from grazing to drought-resistant browse in the 14th century, a desperate adaptation that couldn't stave off collapse. What makes these discoveries so compelling isn't just the physical evidence, it's how they challenge earlier assumptions. For years, historians blamed trade decline solely on political upheaval or foreign interference. Now we know nature itself was a conspirator. A single volcanic eruption in Indonesia, traced through sulfur deposits in Antarctic ice cores, may have triggered the Great Drying that disrupted Trans-Saharan routes for decades. Meanwhile, marine sediment layers off the Swahili coast preserve traces of ancient cyclones powerful enough to sink entire spice fleets. Yet climate's role wasn't always destructive. In Ethiopia's highlands, core samples from Lake Tana show a brief wet period in the 15th century that allowed the expansion of coffee cultivation, a crop that would eventually eclipse gold in global importance. This duality is key. While some routes perished, others adapted or were born anew. The real lesson lies not in the fragility of these networks, but in their resilience. Even as dunes swallowed the salt trails of Tagheza, Tuareg traders shifted to lunar navigation, using star cycles to predict rare rainfall. In the Congo, Ivory merchants switched from overland paths to river canoes when floods made forests impassable. Today, as scientists piece together Africa's climatic past using everything from termite mound isotopes to fossilized baobab pollen, they're uncovering a truth more nuanced than simple cause and effect. Climate didn't just destroy trade routes, it reshaped them, forcing innovations that echo in modern markets. The real mystery isn't why some networks vanished, but how others endured against impossible odds. Perhaps the answer lies not in the sands or sediments, but in the unwritten codes of the traders themselves. Those who understood that survival wasn't about controlling the environment, but learning to read its whispers. The first Portuguese caravels that appeared off Africa's coast in the 1400s carried more than exotic goods. They brought an economic earthquake. At first, these European traders seemed like just another group of merchants, offering brassware and textiles for gold and ivory. But their ledgers told a different story. Unlike the intricate reciprocal trade systems that had flourished for centuries, the newcomers kept meticulous records of debts and deficits, treating commerce as extraction rather than exchange. In the Kingdom of Benin, artisans who had once crafted bronze masterpieces for local royalty suddenly found themselves mass-producing plaques for European collectors, their art reduced to curiosities. Along the Swahili coast, entire fleets of dhows sat rotting in harbors as Portuguese forts monopolized the spice trade. This wasn't just competition, it was the unmaking of a continent's economic DNA. Archaeological evidence reveals how brutally this shift occurred. At Elmina Castle in Ghana, excavations uncovered African trade beads deliberately smashed and buried beneath new European-style buildings, a symbolic erasure of existing networks. Ship manifests from Lisbon show how Portuguese captains systematically stockpiled African-made compasses and astrolabes, not to use them, but to deprive local navigators of their tools. Even more telling are the burn layers found in Congo's Mbanza and Sundi, where fire-scarred trade goods and hastily abandoned market stalls suggest violent takeover rather than gradual decline. The pattern is clear. Where European powers couldn't control existing routes, they sabotaged them. Yet some African states fought back with astonishing ingenuity. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe pivoted from gold exports to supplying inland copper markets, creating a shadow economy that frustrated Portuguese tax collectors. In Senegambia, Wolof traders developed a system of silent weights, counterfeit measures that cheated European buyers while preserving fair trade among locals. But the most remarkable resistance came from the Makassar sailors of East Africa, who adopted European ship designs only to outmaneuver them, using stolen maps to reopen forbidden spice routes under cover of monsoon rains. The true cost of this interference emerges in the demographic record. Before European arrival, Timbuktu's Sankore University hosted scholars from 3 continents. Within 2 centuries, its libraries stood empty. The population of Kilwa, once a bustling hub of 50,000, dwindled to a few hundred fishermen. But the greatest loss wasn't in wealth or numbers, it was in knowledge. When Dutch merchants seized the cinnamon trade, they burned entire groves to prevent local cultivation, severing a botanical tradition stretching back millennia. British slavers deliberately targeted griots and blacksmiths, understanding that destroying cultural memory was more effective than destroying armies. Today, historians are piecing together the full scope of this disruption through unexpected sources. Shipworm damage on sunken Swahili vessels suggests they were deliberately run aground to block Portuguese harbors. Tooth enamel analysis from Congo skeletons reveals periods of famine coinciding with Portuguese crop buying sprees. Even the humble cowrie shell tells a story. Once a sacred currency across West Africa, it became a tool of colonial inflation when Europeans dumped billions from the Maldives, collapsing local economies overnight. The most haunting question isn't whether colonialism destroyed African trade networks, but how quickly and completely the destruction occurred. In the space of a few generations, routes that had weathered climate shifts and dynastic wars were unraveled by ledgers and gunpowder. Yet fragments survived in unexpected ways. Tuareg salt caravans still follow star paths their ancestors used to evade French patrols. In Mozambique, fishermen recite poems that covertly map pearl beds their great-grandparents hid from German collectors. These aren't just memories, they're living resistance, proof that some networks didn't vanish. They went underground, waiting for the day their knowledge would be valued again. Beneath the dense canopy of the Congo rainforest, where human eyes see only tangled greenery, lasers are uncovering what centuries of decay concealed. LiDAR technology, light detection and ranging, has revealed the ghostly outlines of roads radiating from the vanished city of Ngongo Mbota, their precise curves suggesting engineered drainage systems far beyond what historians believed possible for 15th century Africa. These aren't just paths, they're fingerprints of a sophisticated trade hub, with elevated causeways designed to stay dry during monsoon seasons, connecting inland ivory workshops to distant river ports. The scans even show what ground surveys missed: subtle depressions where way stations once stood, their stone platforms now buried under meters of soil. Satellite imagery adds another layer to this puzzle. In Mauritania's Drought plateau, thermal sensors detected anomalies in the sand, rectangular patterns matching medieval descriptions of Taghase's salt warehouses. When drones zoomed in, they captured something astonishing: faint wheel ruts leading to what appeared to be a massive underground chamber, possibly a hidden storage site for gold awaiting northbound caravans. Across the continent in Kenya, multispectral imaging exposed the buried foundations of Swahili merchant houses near Malindi, their coral walls arranged in precise geometric patterns that mirror Persian Gulf architecture, proving long-suspected trade ties with the Middle East. But perhaps the most unexpected clues come from DNA. Geneticists analyzing dental plaque from skeletons at Timbuktu's medieval cemetery found traces of Asian rice and Indonesian cloves, evidence that these individuals consumed goods from thousands of miles away. Even more revealing was the discovery of distinct genetic markers among the remains, linking some merchants to Berber lineages from North Africa, while others showed ancestry from as far south as Zimbabwe. This wasn't just trade in goods, it was a mingling of people, cultures, and ideas on a scale we're only beginning to comprehend. The real breakthrough, though, lies in combining these technologies. In Ghana's Bono region, archaeologists used drone-mounted magnetometers to locate a previously unknown goldsmith's quarter near Begho. Soil samples from the site contained microscopic gold particles, but it was isotopic analysis that stunned researchers. The gold matched ore from mines nearly 300 miles away, suggesting a centralized refining system. Meanwhile, linguists studying manned languages identified consistent terms for trade weights across 20 dialects, hinting at standardized measures that likely facilitated commerce across vast distances. What makes these discoveries so transformative isn't just their individual findings, but how they force us to rewrite history's assumptions. For generations, European accounts dismissed African trade networks as primitive barter systems. Now we're seeing the truth: currencies as sophisticated as any in medieval Europe, transport infrastructure rivaling the Roman Empire, and quality control systems that ensured Ghanaian gold or Congolese ivory met exacting standards. The most poignant revelation came from a humble bead-making site in Ife, Nigeria. X-ray fluorescence proved the glass contained cobalt from Niger's Aya Mountains, a material source so remote that its presence here confirms Trans-Saharan connections centuries earlier than previously believed. As these technological tools grow sharper, they're doing more than filling gaps in our knowledge. They're restoring agency to civilizations long denied their rightful place in global history. When a ground-penetrating radar scan in Zimbabwe detected perfectly aligned post holes beneath the great enclosure, it wasn't just revealing a lost marketplace. It was proving the existence of a regulated economy where space was allocated with mathematical precision. Every pixel of satellite data, every strontium isotope in a tooth, every laser-mapped contour whispers the same truth. Africa's vanished trade networks weren't just accidents of geography. They were masterpieces of human ingenuity waiting for the right tools to tell their story. In the quiet shadows of the great Zimbabwe ruins, archaeologists unearthed something unexpected: not gold or ivory, but small clay figurines buried at every major crossroads. These weren't mere decorations, they were spiritual guardians placed to bless traders who passed and warn those who strayed from sanctioned paths. Across Africa, commerce and the divine were inseparable. The salt caravans of the Sahara timed their journeys to celestial events, guided by priests who read the stars as divine roadmaps. In the forests of the Congo, ivory routes wound around sacred groves where even kings dismounted as a sign of respect. Breaking these rules wasn't just risky, it was unthinkable. A single misstep could anger ancestors, unleash curses, or ignite wars between kingdoms. Consider the mysterious disappearance of the Ouagadougou gold routes. Oral traditions speak of a trader who ignored taboos by mining near a sacred waterfall. Soon after, the entire region fell into drought, and the routes were abandoned for generations. Modern geologists confirmed the legend's kernel of truth. Core samples from the area show a sudden shift to arid conditions around the 12th century. But was it divine punishment or ecological coincidence? The answer may lie in the ruins of Koum by Sale, where excavators found altars stacked with gold dust alongside animal bones, suggesting rituals to pay the land for its wealth. Temples doubled as economic hubs in ways that would baffle modern observers. At Ethiopia's ancient city of Axum, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion wasn't just a place of worship, it was the kingdom's central bank. Chronicles describe how traders deposited gold in its vaults, receiving blessed clay tokens redeemable at distant markets. Similar systems existed in Benin, where brass currency bracelets were cast in the courtyard of the Oba's palace, imbued with spiritual authority that made counterfeiting not just a crime, but a sacrilege. The most compelling evidence of this sacred commerce bond comes from the Swahili coast. When divers explored the wreck of a 15th century how near Mombasa, they found spices carefully packed alongside Quranic inscriptions on palm leaves, not as cargo but as spiritual protection. Even more telling are the silent markets of the Sahel, where Tuareg merchants conducted deals without speaking, trusting divine oversight to ensure fairness. These practices weren't superstition, they were sophisticated trust mechanisms in societies where written contracts didn't exist. Why would such systems vanish? The rise of colonial powers played a role. Portuguese invaders famously looted West African shrines, dismissing spiritual sanctions as primitive nonsense. But deeper forces were at work. As climate shifts made old rituals seem ineffective, new generations questioned ancient taboos. In Mali, the decline of the Jinn priesthood coincided with merchants adopting Islamic banking practices, blending tradition with changing beliefs. Yet echoes remain. Modern Mauritanian salt traders still avoid traveling on certain lunar phases, and Yoruba business deals often begin with libations to the Orishas. The sacred trade networks didn't so much disappear as transform, their spiritual DNA woven into the fabric of Africa's enduring commercial resilience. High atop a sandstone hill in southern Africa, the ruins of Mapungubwe whisper a tantalizing riddle. This was no ordinary settlement between the 11th and 13th centuries. It stood as the heart of a thriving kingdom, its rulers lounging on golden rhino statues while controlling trade routes that stretched to the Indian Ocean. Then, abruptly, the gold stopped flowing. The elite abandoned their hilltop palaces, leaving behind treasures buried beneath floors as if expecting to return. For decades, historians blamed invaders, perhaps the rising Great Zimbabwe Empire to the north. But the truth, as archaeologists are now discovering, is far more complex, woven from climate shifts, economic upheaval, and a trade network that unraveled thread by thread. Start with the gold. Recent excavations at Mapungubwe's sister site, K2, revealed something startling. Layers of gold slag waste from smelting that grow thinner over time, then vanish entirely. Chemical analysis shows the later slag contains impurities, suggesting miners were scraping the bottom of depleted veins. At the same time, ocean sediment cores from Mozambique's coast show a spike in ivory particles around 1250, evidence that traders pivoted from gold to elephants as their primary export. But this desperate shift came at a cost. Cut marks on recovered tusks indicate rushed harvesting, with less care taken to preserve the full length prized by Swahili and Arab buyers. Quality dropped, and so did profits. Then came the rains, or rather, their disappearance. Tree ring data from ancient baobabs paints a grim picture. 2 decades of drought in the mid-13th century that would have parched the Limpopo River, Mapungubwe's lifeline. Normally, traders moved goods by canoe during the wet season, but pollen samples tell us vegetation along the banks withered. Without water transport, caravans faced brutal overland treks through tsetse-fly territory, a death sentence for pack oxen. Archaeologists found their skeletons near dried-up waterholes, some still yoked to collapsed carts laden with unsold ivory. The final blow may have been diplomatic. Among the ruins, researchers uncovered shards of Chinese celadon pottery, once gifts from Swahili middlemen to curry favor. Later layers contain only local imitations, suggesting the ocean trade had moved on. A single copper scroll found in 2019 holds a clue. It lists tribute payments from Mapungubwe to an unnamed northern power, growing larger each year until the entries stop mid-sentence. Was this great Zimbabwe flexing its muscles, or proof that Mapungubwe's rulers bled their kingdom dry trying to maintain alliances? What makes this collapse so haunting isn't its inevitability, but its avoidability. Soil studies show the kingdom's farmers had begun terracing hills to combat erosion, an innovation that came too late. At Thulemla, a northern outpost, archaeologists found stocked granaries beside hastily built defensive walls, proof that some saw crisis coming. Yet in the end, knowledge wasn't enough. The last artifact recovered from Mapungubwe's royal quarter, a single ivory die resting on a gaming board, as if someone left mid-roll, expecting to finish their turn any moment. Some losses aren't just economic, they're the sound of a world pausing indefinitely, waiting for a recovery that never comes. The idea that Africa's trade networks simply vanished is more myth than reality, like mist dissolving into morning light only to reappear elsewhere. While some routes did collapse under the weight of drought or invasion, others transformed with remarkable ingenuity, adapting to new rulers, technologies, and economic tides. Take the salt caravans of the Sahara, which didn't disappear when European ships began importing cheaper sea salt. Instead, Tuareg traders pivoted to smuggling luxury goods like ostrich feathers and indigo dyes beneath French colonial patrols, using the same hidden oases their ancestors had relied upon for centuries. Even the language of trade evolved. Old Berber codes for gold weights resurfaced as encryption for anti-colonial messages, proving that commerce and resistance could share the same path. Clues to this continuity hide in plain sight. In Timbuktu's archives, a 15th century ledger lists payments to the sand scribes, route masters who memorized shifting dune patterns. Centuries later, British colonial officers complained of phantom caravans slipping past tax stations, guided by those very same navigation techniques. Meanwhile, the Swahili coast spice networks didn't so much vanish as decentralize. When Omani sultans monopolized clove exports, local growers began smuggling saplings to Madagascar in hollowed-out coconuts, creating new production hubs that undercut the Sultan's control. What Europeans dismissed as collapse was often deliberate obfuscation, a survival strategy written in disappearing ink. The most compelling evidence lies in living traditions. In Mali's Dogon country, blacksmiths still cast bronze using furnaces identical to those that once produced trade goods for medieval Ghana. The techniques weren't lost, they simply retreated into ritual. Similarly, the market languages of West Africa coded whistles and drum rhythms used to communicate across ethnic lines, still surface in rural marketplaces during disputes, a ghostly echo of the trust systems that once enabled cross-continental trade. Even the famed gold weights of the Akan people found new purpose, repurposed as teaching tools for children's math lessons, ensuring the knowledge embedded in their designs endured. Perhaps the greatest misreading of history is assuming that written records tell the whole story. Portuguese accounts boast of discovering African gold routes, yet fail to mention the networks they documented had existed for centuries under different names. A Timbuktu manuscript from the 1600s describes merchants abandoning the Sahara for the river roads, redirecting trade along the Niger to avoid Moroccan occupiers. Later, these same waterways became arteries for the transatlantic slave trade, a grim evolution, but an evolution nonetheless. The truth is, Africa's trade networks were never static. Like roots seeking water, they shifted course when blocked, resurfacing in unexpected forms. What we call disappearance was often just reinvention, hidden in the shadows of louder histories. Beneath the golden glow of Saharan market squares and the hum of Swahili port cities, women shaped the pulse of Africa's trade networks in ways history books rarely acknowledge. Take the legendary gold markets of medieval Mali, where Arab traveler Ibn Battuta noted with surprise that female merchants presided over entire sections, setting prices and brokering deals with foreign traders. These weren't exceptions, they were part of a vast, interconnected system where women controlled everything from textile production to the spiritual rituals that blessed caravans before their journeys. A 12th century terracotta figurine unearthed in Nigeria depicts a woman with scales in one hand and an ivory tusk in the other, her elaborate headdress marking her as both a trader and a community leader. Yet for centuries, such artifacts were dismissed as fertility idols by colonial collectors who couldn't conceive of women as economic powers. The erasure runs deeper than overlooked artifacts. In the kingdom of Dahomey, the famed Ahosi, or royal wives, weren't just palace attendants, they managed the kingdom's palm oil exports, with ledgers showing they negotiated directly with Portuguese and Dutch buyers. Their accounts, written in fawn script on palm leaf strips, were deliberately destroyed during French colonization, leaving only fragments rediscovered in 20th century Attic hoards. Similarly, Swahili court records from Kilwa describe Queen Fatuma binti Sultan, ruling not just as a figurehead, but as the architect of a clandestine spice route that bypassed Omani middlemen. Her network used a system of dyed cloth signals to coordinate shipments, a code so effective that frustrated Arab merchants accused her of witchcraft. Why did these stories fade? Partly because European chroniclers obsessed with patriarchal models rewrote what they witnessed. A Portuguese sailor's journal from 1592 describes the market mothers of Benin City setting exchange rates, but his superiors edited the passage to credit male elders instead. Even archaeology played a role. Early digs focused on grand royal tombs, missing the smaller but equally significant graves of wealthy merchant women buried with trade weights and foreign coins. Modern techniques tell a different story. Residue analysis on cooking pots from Great Zimbabwe's elite quarters reveals traces of imported spices in areas traditionally associated with women's spaces, suggesting they controlled access to luxury goods. Oral traditions preserve what written records erased. The Bambara people of Mali still sing of Nana Triben, a 17th century trader who used her knowledge of desert wells to broker peace between warring salt clans. In Ethiopia, Harari women recite poems about their ancestors' secret banking system, using beaded belts as collateral for loans long before formal credit existed. Perhaps most striking are the Adinkra, symbols of Ghana's Akan people. Among their hundreds of proverbs woven into cloth, one pattern called Obapa shows linked hands, commemorating the female trade guilds that once dominated kola nut markets. The real tragedy isn't just that these women were forgotten, but how their exclusion warped our understanding of Africa's economic past. When Portuguese ships arrived off the coast of Congo, they assumed the men greeting them were the decision-makers, missing entirely that Queen Nzinga's female advisors controlled the inland trade routes supplying the ports. Today, as linguists decode women's merchant argot in Swahili legal documents and chemists trace perfume ingredients in medieval Mauritanian women's tombs, a new picture emerges of credit systems run through women's social networks, of trade disputes settled by female elders, and of entire industries like indigo dyeing and pottery kept deliberately decentralized to prevent male warlords monopolizing them. The sands of time may have buried much, but not everything. In a quiet corner of Timbuktu's archives, a fragile manuscript lists the names of over 200 women who financed Trans-Saharan caravans. Faded but legible, the ink whispers what archaeology now confirms. Africa's forbidden trade networks weren't just built by kings and conquerors. They thrived because of the women who wove trust into every transaction, whose stories are finally being pulled from the shadows where history tried to hide them. The golden trails that once carried salt and ivory across the Sahara took on a darker purpose as the centuries turned. What began as routes for exchanging precious goods became corridors for an unimaginable human tragedy. the Trans-Saharan slave trade. Caravans that had transported copper ingots and cola nuts now marched enslaved people northward, their footsteps tracing the same paths where merchants had once haggled over spices and gold dust. This shift wasn't incidental, it was systemic. The very secrecy that protected these networks, the hidden oases, the coded maps, the trusted guides, made them tragically effective for trafficking human lives. Archaeological evidence paints a haunting picture. At the ruins of Ayuda Coast, a major trading post in Mauritania, excavators found shackles designed for children alongside the remnants of camel caravans. In the Niger Bend region, oral histories speak of the weeping roads, paths where enslaved individuals were forced to carry heavy salt slabs to disguise their movements from potential rescuers. Even the financial systems adapted. Old gold weights from Ghana's Akan people have been discovered repurposed to measure out payments for human cargo, their once sacred symbols now part of a brutal economy. The moral contradiction is staggering. Many of the same kingdoms that fiercely guarded their trade secrets, like the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa, became enmeshed in this new commerce. Musa himself purchased thousands of enslaved people during his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, while Songhai rulers used captives as rowers for Niger River trade fleets. Yet to frame this as simple hypocrisy misses a crucial point. Pre-colonial African slavery often functioned differently than the race-based chattel slavery Europeans would later impose, with some enslaved individuals able to rise to positions of power, earn freedom, or even marry into royal families. The real rupture came when European demand industrialized the trade, turning human beings into interchangeable commodities on an unprecedented scale. The scars of this era linger in unexpected ways. Swahili coastal towns that once bustled with ivory traders became departure points for slave ships, their economies warped overnight. In Senegal's Gorée Island, the infamous Door of No Return stands just yards from where merchants once unloaded bolts of fine Moroccan leather. Even the geography of resistance tells a story. Runaway communities in the Liberian hinterland often settled along abandoned gold routes, using their knowledge of hidden paths to evade recapture. Perhaps the most painful legacy lies in how the slave trade corrupted the very idea of secrecy. Trust systems that had sustained commerce for generations, like the Sonic, Diatigui networks of trade partners, were exploited to funnel captives toward the coast. The silent barter methods once used to protect gold sources now serve to obscure human suffering. When British abolitionists finally penetrated these routes in the 19th century, they didn't just find slave caravans, they discovered meticulous records in Arabic and local languages, proof that this horror had been bureaucratized using skills honed over centuries of honorable trade. Today, as historians piece together this chapter, they face a difficult truth. The same ingenuity that made Africa's trade networks resilient also made them vulnerable to perversion. The forbidden routes weren't just victims of this shift, their very effectiveness became their curse. Yet amid this darkness, glimmers of humanity endure. In Timbuktu's archives, a single manuscript from 1624 records a merchant's anguished decision to dismantle his salt caravan rather than transport enslaved people, writing, "No wealth is worth the unraveling of one soul." Fragile as it may seem, that moral thread woven through centuries of commerce refuses to fully break. Scattered across the Sahel, half buried in riverbanks and tucked beneath the roots of ancient baobabs, lie shards of pottery etched with markings that defy translation. These aren't mere decorations, they're fragments of a lost economic language, a system of symbols used by traders to record transactions, track debts, and authenticate goods across vast distances. Take the enigmatic signs on Nok terracottas from Nigeria, where spirals and zigzags cluster near depictions of market scenes. For decades, archaeologists assumed these were ritual motifs. Then a breakthrough came when linguists noticed identical patterns on medieval merchant contracts from Timbuktu, buried in a cache of documents beneath a collapsed caravan stop. Suddenly, those decorations revealed their true purpose: coded inventory lists, mapping ivory quantities to standardized units of copper or salt. The real Rosetta Stones of African trade may be hiding in plain sight. In the ruins of Sijil Mossa, a Moroccan gateway to the Sahara, researchers found lead tokens stamped with geometric designs matching symbols on Ghanaian gold weights. These weren't just random shapes, they represented denominations, like a medieval barcode system. Even more compelling are the stelae of Axum, towering stone slabs in Ethiopia covered in what was long considered royal propaganda. But when scholars superimposed these inscriptions over Sabaean trade records from Yemen, patterns emerged. The so-called king lists were actually tariffs, detailing taxes on frankincense and myrrh caravans. One particularly dense section turned out to be a dispute resolution contract, complete with clauses about camel load limits and penalties for counterfeit spices. Breaking these codes requires more than linguistic skill. It demands cross-disciplinary detective work. In Mali's Dogon country, anthropologists recorded elders reciting oral histories that mentioned the writing of the merchants. Years later, chemists analyzing pottery from the Bandiagara escarpment found traces of plant-based inks matching the exact recipes described in those stories. By combining these clues, researchers realized certain symbols changed color when exposed to tampering, serving as ancient anti-fraud measures. Similarly, the Nsibidi script of southeastern Nigeria, once dismissed as ritual art, has been reclassified as a full-trade lingua franca after scholars linked its symbols to Igbo Akwu bronze weights and Agala salt measures. Perhaps the most tantalizing puzzle comes from the Swahili coast. Zanzibar's museum holds a collection of medieval coins called fuseli, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of hands. Under ultraviolet light, however, microscopic scratches resolve into what appear to be abbreviations not in Arabic, as expected, but in a dialect of Comorian. This suggests the existence of a maritime trade argot, a secret shorthand used by Dhow captains to bypass official tax records. Supporting evidence emerged when divers exploring a wreck near Mafia Island found a lead tablet inscribed with what looks like a cargo manifest, its columns alternating between Arabic numerals and mysterious pictographs resembling monsoon clouds and fish. What makes these discoveries revolutionary isn't just their content, it's what they reveal about pre-colonial Africa's economic sophistication. The old colonial myth of barter economies crumbles when you examine a 14th century Malian ledger recently decoded in Gen. Its grid of symbols tracks compound interest on loans, with separate columns for gold dust, cola nuts, and even futures contracts on salt caravans. Similarly, the Tifinagh script used by Tuareg nomads contains numerical symbols that functioned as a Saharan double-entry bookkeeping system, complete with error-checking marks that mirror modern accounting. The work is far from over. In a lab at the University of Cape Town, AI algorithms are scanning thousands of pottery fragments, searching for recurring symbol sequences that might reconstruct a lost trade grammar. Meanwhile, historians are re-examining European explorers' journals with fresh eyes, not for their biased narratives, but for the incidental sketches of market scenes where symbols on stalls or cloth banners might preserve fragments of these commercial languages. Every crack in the code doesn't just reveal prices or products, it uncovers networks of trust, systems of value, and the unwritten rules that bound together a continent's economy long before outsiders drew their maps. The truth isn't just written in ink or stone. It's woven into the very fabric of Africa's forgotten exchanges, waiting for the right combination of patience and insight to make it legible again. The hunt for Africa's lost trade networks has become a modern-day gold rush, with treasure seekers of all kinds drawn to the whispers of buried gold and forgotten ivory caches. In Mauritania's dunes, amateur archaeologists armed with metal detectors scan the sands for Taghase's legendary salt slabs, while in Zimbabwe, local farmers stumble upon stone foundations half buried in their fields, remnants of great Zimbabwe's sprawling marketplaces. But not all who seek these treasures come with reverence. Looters, armed with smuggled colonial-era maps and backhoes, tear through sacred sites under cover of darkness, selling fragments of history to the highest bidder. Last year alone, Mali's cultural ministry reported over 40 raids on undisturbed caravan stops, their artifacts vanishing into the shadowy world of antique auctions. The damage isn't just physical, it's a theft of knowledge. When a looted terracotta figurine from the Nok culture surfaces in a Paris gallery, its origins erased, we lose more than an artifact. We lose the context that could explain its role in a long-vanished trade network. A single gold weight stripped from its archaeological layer can't reveal whether it measured dust for Saharan salt or payments for enslaved people. Ethical digs, like those at Ethiopia's Beta Samoti, show what's possible when patience replaces plunder. There, archaeologists spent years meticulously documenting a 4th century Christian basilica built atop an even older trade hub, uncovering incense burners from Yemen and glass beads from India, each layer telling a richer story than the last. Yet the line between discovery and destruction isn't always clear. In Ghana's Bono region, traditional leaders recently halted a university excavation near ancient gold pits, arguing that disturbing the earth would anger ancestral spirits guarding the sites. Meanwhile, tech-savvy treasure hunters argue that drones and ground-penetrating radar make their work less invasive than old-school digs, but tools alone don't guarantee ethics. A German collector's viral YouTube series, Lost Kingdoms of the Sahara, boasts of using LiDAR to locate buried caravanserais, while conspicuously avoiding mention of how his team smuggled medieval manuscripts across borders under the guise of research. The solution may lie in collaboration. In Tanzania, the Swahili Coast's descendants now lead archaeology tours, teaching visitors how to spot and report looted pottery shards. Senegal's government trains former looters as site guardians, paying them to protect the very ruins they once ransacked. And in Namibia, Himba elders work with geologists to document sacred copper mines, ensuring their stories are preserved before multinational mining companies move in. These partnerships prove that history doesn't have to be a zero-sum game between secrecy and discovery. Perhaps the greatest lesson comes from Timbuktu's manuscript librarians, who spent centuries safeguarding trade records in locked chests, only to see them threatened by both colonial looters and modern militants. Their response, not tighter locks, but painstaking digitization, making the secrets of the Sahara accessible to all while keeping the originals safe. In the end, the true treasure isn't gold or ivory, but the fragile threads of memory that connect us to the traders, spies, and visionaries who once wove this continent together. Their legacy deserves more than a price tag. It demands our patience, our humility, and above all, our respect. A tiny blue bead no larger than a peppercorn might seem insignificant until you realize it traveled from the workshops of Venice to the tombs of medieval Mali, carried across thousands of miles by merchants who navigated without maps. These fragments of glass and clay are more than artifacts. They're breadcrumbs left behind by history's greatest traders, each one marking a step along routes long since faded from memory. In a lab at the University of Ghana, researchers recently made a startling discovery. Beads excavated from a 15th century burial site near the Niger River matched the chemical signature of glass produced in Bohemia, proving trade links between Central Europe and West Africa centuries earlier than previously thought. The real revelation wasn't just the distance covered, it was the precision. These beads were found in clusters of exactly 42, a number that corresponds to standard trade quantities recorded in Moroccan ledgers from the same period. Someone somewhere was counting. Pottery tells an even richer story. At first glance, a broken shard from the Swahili coast might look like any other terracotta. Until you examine its temper, the material mixed into the clay to strengthen it. In Zanzibar, archaeologists found cooking pots tempered with crushed seashells, a technique unique to coastal villages. Yet hundreds of miles inland, near the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, identical shells appeared in storage vessels. The implication: not only were goods moving, but so was knowledge. Potters from the coast must have traded secrets with their inland counterparts, or perhaps entire families relocated, bringing their craft with them. Even the decorations hold clues. A zigzag pattern on a bowl from Benin might mirror designs on Ethiopian Coptic crosses, suggesting aesthetic trends spread as rapidly as the goods themselves. Metalwork offers the most dramatic evidence of all. A humble copper bangle unearthed in Mauritania might bear the faintest trace of gold plating, a telltale sign it passed through the workshops of Timbuktu, where artisans perfected the art of gilding. In Kenya's Lamu archipelago, X-ray fluorescence revealed that ceremonial daggers contained nickel from a single mine in southern Africa. Their blades traded along routes Europeans wouldn't document for another 300 years. But the real breakthrough came when scientists analyzed lead isotopes in Aksumite coins. The metal matched ore from mines in Yemen, proving that the kingdom's legendary wealth came not just from controlling trade, but from participating in it at the highest levels, minting currency that circulated across the Red Sea. The true power of these artifacts lies in what they don't say. A bead doesn't record the name of the merchant who carried it, or the storms they survived along the way. A potsherd won't tell you about the feast it served at, or the hands that shaped it. Yet together, they form a mosaic of connections, proof that Africa's trade networks weren't isolated threads, but a vast, shimmering web. In a backroom at the British Museum, a curator recently lined up glass beads from Egypt, India, and West Africa. Under ultraviolet light, they glowed identical shades of cobalt blue, all tinted with the same rare mineral from Afghanistan. 3 continents, 1 supply chain. The silence of these objects isn't emptiness, it's an invitation to lean closer, to hear the echoes of a world that spoke the universal language of exchange. The ruins of ancient trade cities tell conflicting stories. Some speak of abrupt catastrophe, others of slow unraveling. At Kumbai Sale, once the glittering capital of the Ghana Empire, archaeologists found cooking pots still perched on hearths, their contents charred as if families fled mid-meal. Yet just 100 miles away in Ayuda Coast, the layers of debris show a different pattern. Successive rebuildings on crumbling foundations, each more desperate than the last. These aren't just academic distinctions, they're clues to whether Africa's trade networks met sudden violent ends or withered from prolonged neglect. War leaves unmistakable scars. In the ruins of Tadmeka, a Saharan trading post, researchers uncovered arrowheads embedded in the walls of granaries, evidence of a siege that starved the city into submission. Even more telling are the mass graves near the Niger River, where skeletons from the 14th century bear wounds from distinctive Moroccan blades, confirming written accounts of the Sultan's brutal campaign to control gold routes. Yet warfare alone doesn't explain why some cities burned while others merely emptied. The answer may lie in what historians call the the brittle versus the resilient. Centers like Timbuktu, with diverse economic routes, survived invasions by shifting to alternate trade goods, while single-resource hubs like Taghaza, entirely dependent on salt, collapsed when their monopoly broke. Then there's the silent killer, disease. Soil samples from Great Zimbabwe's drainage ditches contain traces of plague bacteria, matching pandemic timelines recorded in Arabic medical texts. But the real smoking gun comes from Lake Chad's sediment cores. Layers of dead algae suddenly spiking around 1350 coincide with accounts of the Great Coughing, a sickness so devastating it halted Trans-Saharan caravans for a generation. Unlike war's localized destruction, plague severed the connective tissue of trust. When traders stopped traveling, knowledge of routes faded, and entire networks dissolved into legend. Yet nature often delivered the cruelest blows. In the Congo basin, pollen records show rainforests retreating as savannas advanced around 1400, disrupting the delicate ecosystems that supported ivory hunters. At the Swahili port of Kilwa, coral reefs preserve tsunami scars dating to the 15th century, waves powerful enough to smash the stone docks where spices once loaded onto dhows. Most haunting are the ghost wells of the Sahara, their depths filled with sandstorms worth of grit, marking decades when droughts made crossing impossible. These weren't temporary setbacks, they permanently rewrote the map of commerce. A single abandoned camel found in Mauritania's dunes, its bones curled around an unopened water skin, tells a story no chronicle ever could. The truth resists simplicity. At Ngazargamu, the Kanem-Bornu Empire's capital, excavations reveal a city that adapted to crisis after crisis, relocating markets when rivers shifted, switching from slave exports to cola nuts when morals changed until finally, exhausted, it dwindled into a village. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia's highlands, the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela thrived precisely because they lay off major trade routes, escaping the attention of raiders and tax collectors alike. Perhaps collapse wasn't an event, but a spectrum from violent erasure to quiet transformation. The real mystery isn't why these networks fell, but how some fragments endured, carried forward in the songs of griots and the rituals of blacksmiths, waiting for the world to need them again. The bustling ports of East Africa once teemed with merchants speaking a dozen languages, their ships laden with goods that would cross oceans. Chinese porcelain fragments unearthed in Great Zimbabwe tell of trade routes stretching to the Song dynasty's kilns, while Indian spices buried in Swahili tombs hint at partnerships older than the Silk Road. These weren't just casual exchanges, they were lifelines binding continents. A single Ming dynasty ledger from 1421 describes a fleet of 62 treasure ships anchoring off Melindi, their holds stuffed with silk for African ivory. Yet within a century, these voyages stopped abruptly. The sea routes didn't collapse from lack of demand, but from a perfect storm of political shifts and ecological pressures that rewrote the rules of global trade. Foreign chronicles reveal surprising details about these lost partnerships. A Persian captain's log from Hormuz details how Swahili merchants used monsoon winds to make annual voyages to Gujarat, returning with cotton so fine it was woven into royal robes. But the same document notes a sudden decline in these trips after 1520, coinciding with Portuguese warships blockading Indian ports. Similarly, excavations at Madagascar's Vohema harbor uncovered Arabian astrolabes alongside Chinese compasses, proof of shared navigation knowledge. Yet local oral traditions speak of the Great Turning Away, when foreign traders ceased visiting after a mysterious blight wiped out the island's prized clove trees. The fragility of these connections becomes stark when you realize how dependent they were on delicate balances. A sultan's favor in Oman, predictable winds in the Indian Ocean, or the survival of a single species in distant forests. Some ruptures were deliberate. When the Ming dynasty retreated into isolation under the Hongxi emperor, entire trade networks unraveled overnight. Chinese records show how African envoys bearing giraffes as gifts were turned away from Beijing's ports, their diplomatic ties severed by imperial decree. Meanwhile, Ottoman tax records from Aden document rising tariffs on African goods in the 1600s, pushing Swahili merchants into risky smuggling operations. The real tragedy lies in the innovations lost, like the floating warehouses described in a Malay manuscript, where African and Indonesian traders anchored midway across the Indian Ocean to exchange goods without revealing their home ports. This system of neutral meeting points collapsed when European powers began mapping coastlines, replacing trust with force. Yet traces of these partnerships endure in unexpected places. In Kerala's Mattancherry Palace, murals depict dark-skinned traders presenting leopard pelts to local Rogers, their ships' sails painted with Swahili proverbs. Yemeni coffee ceremonies still use serving pots modeled on Ethiopian designs, a silent tribute to the Red Sea trade that introduced coffee to the world. Even language preserves these connections. The Swahili word for rice derives from Malay, while Tamil loanwords pepper the dialects of Mogadishu's fish markets. These fragments suggest something profound. The links didn't fully disappear. They retreated into cultural memory, waiting for historians to piece together their true significance. The lesson of these faded partnerships isn't just about loss, but about the precariousness of connection. A change in imperial policy in Nanjing could empty the docks of Kilwa. A new tax in Baghdad might reroute gold caravans across uncharted deserts. What makes these networks so compelling isn't their scale, but their vulnerability and the quiet resilience with which African traders adapted again and again. Porcelain shards and ship logs aren't just relics. They're reminders that globalization isn't a modern invention, but an ancient dance of opportunity and disruption, with rhythms we're still learning to understand. The bustling markets of ancient Africa operated on principles that would make any modern economist pause. Unlike today's obsession with constant growth and transparency, these networks thrived on careful balance, knowing when to trade, when to hide, and when to pivot entirely. Take sustainability. The medieval Mali Empire didn't just extract gold. They regulated mining to prevent depletion, rotating sites to let exhausted veins recover. Compare that to modern lithium rush in the Congo, where unchecked extraction risks repeating history's mistakes. Then there's Secrecy. The Wangara goldfields weren't hidden out of paranoia, but to maintain value, a lesson modern crypto traders might recognize. When everyone knows the source, scarcity vanishes and markets collapse. Adaptability was their greatest weapon. Saharan salt traders didn't just abandon routes when droughts hit. They reinvented them, shifting from camels to river canoes along the Niger. Modern supply chains, paralyzed by a single blocked canal or pandemic, could learn from this resilience. Even failure holds insights. Great Zimbabwe's collapse came partly from over-reliance on a single export ivory, mirroring how oil-dependent economies today struggle to diversify. The difference: ancient traders had no bailouts or global treaties to soften the blow. Their survival depended on reading the land and listening to communities, skills we've swapped for algorithms and just-in-time delivery. The most striking parallel lies in trust systems. Without contracts or courts, Swahili spice merchants used family networks and sacred oaths to enforce deals across oceans. Today's blockchain enthusiasts tout smart contracts as revolutionary, yet these ancient models achieved similar results through social capital. When Portuguese invaders disrupted these bonds with brute force, trade collapsed, not unlike how sanctions can unravel modern economies overnight. Perhaps the greatest warning comes from the Trans-Saharan slave trade, where networks designed for gold were perverted into trafficking humans. It's a grim reminder that infrastructure isn't neutral. Its use depends on who controls it. Contemporary economists are finally taking note. The UN's latest trade report cites Benin's pre-colonial Nsibidi accounting symbols as inspiration for disaster-resistant record-keeping. Meanwhile, Silicon Valley studies Tuareg navigation methods to build AI logistics systems that adapt to climate disruptions. Even the secrecy tactics of Congo's ivory traders find echoes in today's intellectual property wars, where companies guard patents as fiercely as any medieval kingdom hid its mines. The past whispers a simple truth. Trade isn't just about moving goods, it's about weaving relationships that can bend without breaking. Whether modern networks heed these lessons may determine which ones survive the next great unraveling. Preserving the fragments of Africa's vanished trade networks demands more than archaeology. It requires a delicate dance between memory and modernity. In Mali's Timbuktu, librarians risked their lives during militant occupation to smuggle medieval merchant manuscripts into hiding, proving that safeguarding this heritage isn't just about bricks and mortar, but the living knowledge they hold. UNESCO designation of the stone town of Zanzibar as a World Heritage Site protects the coral rag buildings where spice deals were once struck, yet the real challenge lies beneath the surface. Rising sea levels threaten to dissolve the very foundations of these coastal trading posts, their porous limestone absorbing salt water like a grim echo of the caravans that once carried salt inland. Local initiatives are rewriting the preservation playbook. In Ghana's Akan region, elders have revived the craft of lost wax casting to recreate historic gold weights, not as museum pieces, but as teaching tools in schools. Meanwhile, Mauritanian nomads use smartphone apps to record the oral histories of aging caravan guides, geotagging forgotten wells and dune paths before they vanish from living memory. But funding remains a hurdle while Europe pours millions into restoring medieval castles. A single Saharan trade outpost like Ayuda Coast struggles to secure grants for basic stabilization. The imbalance speaks volumes about whose history gets prioritized. Political instability adds another layer of fragility. The looting of museums in conflict zones like Libya and Somalia isn't just theft, it's the erasure of economic memory. When militants destroyed Timbuktu's mausoleums, they weren't just attacking buildings, they were severing ties to the scholarly networks that once made the city a hub of Trans-Saharan commerce. Yet even in crisis, ingenuity persists. Congolese curators have begun micro-etching trade route maps onto durable mica sheets, burying them in protected locations as a failsafe against cultural amnesia. The most promising solutions blend old and new. In Ethiopia, drones map Axum's obelisks, once markers of trade routes, while local children play a board game based on ancient salt bartering rules, learning economics through play. Zanzibar's archives now store digitized copies of spice contracts in blockchain, ensuring no single power can alter the records. These aren't just preservation tactics, they're acts of defiance against the forces that once dismantled these networks. Every salvaged ledger, every restored caravanserai, every song recalling the price of ivory in copper ingots is a thread rewoven into the fabric of a history too vital to lose. The work continues not in grand gestures, but in the quiet determination of those who understand that to protect these remnants is to honor the invisible highways that once connected a continent. The forbidden trade networks of ancient Africa weren't just pathways for goods, they were the lifeblood of entire civilizations, pulsing with stories of innovation, secrecy, and resilience. These routes wove together kingdoms and cultures, carrying more than gold or salt. They transported ideas, faith, and the very essence of human connection across vast and unforgiving landscapes. Today, as archaeologists brush sand from forgotten caravanserais and linguists decode symbols etched into clay, we're not just uncovering artifacts, we're piecing together the DNA of a globalized world that thrived long before modern maps were drawn. Consider what's been revealed so far: the precision of Saharan traders navigating by stars, the ingenuity of Swahili merchants hiding spice routes in plain sight, the sacred oaths that bound deals tighter than any contract. These weren't primitive systems, they were masterclasses in adaptation, forged by societies that understood the delicate balance between visibility and survival. The ruins of Great Zimbabwe and the whispers of Timbuktu's manuscripts remind us that these networks didn't fail. They were disrupted, dismantled, or driven underground by forces beyond their control. Yet their legacy lingers not just in buried gold weights or sunken D-hows, but in the cultural memory of communities that still honor these traditions in subtle ways. The real revelation lies in how these discoveries challenge long-held assumptions. For centuries, colonial narratives dismissed Africa's pre-colonial economies as rudimentary, ignoring the complex financial instruments, standardized currencies, and transnational partnerships that flourished here. Now, science is rewriting that story. Geochemical analysis traces copper ingots to mines thousands of miles apart, while LiDAR scans expose highway-like causeways hidden beneath Congo's canopy. Each breakthrough is a testament to the sophistication of systems that once rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, those of medieval Europe or Asia, but the work is far from finished. Countless questions remain. Where exactly were the fabled gold fields of Wangara? What caused the sudden abandonment of Ngongo Mbota's ivory workshops? How did the monsoon traders of the Swahili coast predict weather patterns with such accuracy? The answers may lie in unread manuscripts, untranslated oral epics, or even undiscovered ruins waiting beneath shifting dunes. What's certain is that every fragment recovered, whether a bead, a ledger, or a song, adds another stroke to a portrait we're only beginning to see clearly. This isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the roots of global exchange, resilience in the face of disruption, and the enduring power of human ingenuity. As you reflect on these vanished networks, think about the untold stories still buried in your own surroundings. The faded market squares, the overgrown trails, the family traditions that hint at deeper histories. The search for knowledge never truly ends, it simply finds new paths to follow. So, what mysteries captivate you? Share your thoughts below, and join us as we continue unearthing the secrets that shape our world. Don't forget to subscribe. The next chapter of history's greatest puzzles is just waiting to be revealed.